This is Creek with At the Table Podcast. Here at the Table Podcast, our goal is to break down scripture and biblical topics to make them easy to understand and inspire conversation that is ultimately glorifying to God. We pray that this content blesses you, challenges you, and edifies you in your faith. So have a seat at the table, and without further ado, let's get into the show.
Good morning. Yes.
Good morning.
Here's your applause.
Man, I just feel like, what's that actor that played on Gladiator?
What?
Russell Crowe.
Russell Crowe, yes.
Is it Gerard Butler? I never can tell them apart. I think
It's Russell Crowe.
No, I'm pretty sure it's Gerard Butler. And see, now you can't tell them apart.
Welcome to Serpent Stomper Episode 8.
Are you saying
Serpent Stomper.
Sorry, I meant
That's-
Snake Crusher.
That's like the Great Value brand of At the Table Podcast.
Well, we're the Great
It
Value
sounds
brand
kind
of
of like the Bible version of like a crip walk or something. Like
Serpent Stomp.
Serpent stuff. I'm pretty sure there's a YouTube video where you've got some really white people doing something like that.
Probably. Yeah.
Man,
I love those videos, dude.
Yeah,
You know
I
what
could
I'm talking
see,
about.
yeah.
I really don't like those videos, man. I really,
Have you seen the one where they take like it's like an 80s or 90s song and they changed all the words and it's got the guy with the slick back hair and he's dancing?
Yes.
Oh, dude, I can't. What's the song? I can't even remember. It's so
probably
funny.
Never Gonna Give You.
No, it's not. It's not. I can't remember, but
I thought it
nice.
was.
I don't know.
You just
man.
gotta wonder, like, how did you feel good about doing that?
Well, yeah. And the
kids
amount
will
of
see it
time
as
that you
cool.
took when you first had that vision to edit that video, man.
No one told you no.
Or maybe a lot of people did and you just did it anyway.
It's got to be something like that.
I mean, we kind of have that.
That's
that
what happens when
tendency.
you surround yourself with yes men. You end up doing stuff like
Really
that.
cringy videos.
If ain't nobody in your circle telling you no every once in a while and that's not a good idea, you need to find a new circle.
That's legitimate.
Man,
Well, how you guys doing?
good.
Good.
It's kind of cool that our last Exodus episode that dropped the week before Easter, and it was talking about Passover and stuff.
Right.
Which is also this week started the Feast of Unleavened Bread and
Yeah.
Passover as well.
That's actually, I didn't even think about that. That's pretty relevant.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that either, but
I
God's
did.
amazing.
Yo, I was thinking about this Sunday. Like, we call it in evangelical Christianity like Holy Week, and like they find out or they put this event or title on every day. To me, it just seems a little.
Not feeling it?
I kind of get what you're saying.
It's almost like they're reaching for something to try to fill
Yeah.
every day. Like some of them are like, okay.
My thing is, like, the kids get to hunt Easter eggs, and that's cool that you want to reach out to kids and stuff. But I feel like the adults should be able to have real eggs and throw them at each other so we can have fun
You
too.
went in a
Or at the
completely different
kids.
direction.
At the kids.
Dude, first of all, I support that. Second of all, I did not expect you to go there. I thought you were going to go on like a diatribe against the Easter Bunny. I was
Right,
totally
right.
in. I was like, let's
Yeah.
go. I was just telling Dad this morning when we were out walking turkey hunting. I was like, I despise the Easter Bunny.
Me too, bro.
Yeah.
It just kind of makes me sick. I don't even like calling it Easter. I'll just keep it real. That's not even like a religious I'm not even trying to go there necessarily. It's just like, bro, why do we have to
Resurrection Day.
secularize everything?
It's the realization of public enemy number one for
Right.
me, because that sucker, the bunnies are always trying to get in my garden and eat my plants.
Once again, you went in a direction that I did not expect.
Can't take it,
I was sitting here
man.
thinking
He's trying
like,
to avoid a rabbit hole.
the Easter Ishtar thing. Maybe
Did you
are.
intend for that pun? Was
No,
that
I
a pun
didn't.
intended?
Oh, bro.
I was hoping no one
Oh
would point
my
it out,
gosh.
to be honest.
Didn't even pick
This
up on
man
it until the back half
gave
of
this
it.
man control over the sound effects board.
Hey, well, me.
You died and left you in charge.
No one said no. so.
Nobody had to.
Okay. Exodus.
Our Serpent Stomper episode.
Yeah, I wasn't even done. You see, I asked you how you guys were, and then nobody
I
asked
almost
me
asked
how
you,
I
but-
Oh, I'm
was.
sorry. How are you doing?
How are you doing?
I'm not good.
Let me guess. Let me make a prediction. You're running on 8 hours of sleep in the last 2 days, and you've only ran on Red Bull.
And you've gone turkey hunting to no avail and done nothing but catastrophically wasted your time.
Are you a prophet or son of a prophet? Was that a spiritual gift?
No, I just heard you complain.
It was more like
Thanks for the back window.
I'm sorry, buddy. We love Trey. We love Trey.
We've been cranking his fire up for about the past 20 minutes. So his blood pressure's probably looking like something like 120 over 185.
Yeah, I've actually been off my medicine for like 2 weeks.
That's not good.
That's awesome.
That's not good, Scoob.
I've been healed.
I hope so.
You don't fake it till you make it, or are you a son of a prophet now?
No. It had some side effects I didn't.
Anyway, there's some snake crushing to be done. What's going on?
So,
what's at the table today?
We left off last week. We covered the Exodus and the crossing of the Red Sea, and we ended with the song of Moses and Miriam, where the first praise and worship song. Shout out to Miriam. She had a tambourine too. Shout out to them old Pentecostals.
Before Pentecostalism was Pentecostalism.
Although, you know what? I can't stand it.
I don't rock with the tambourine.
Tambourine, if it's not played well, it sounds.
There's kind of a close relation there, when you think like Pentecost is what is the feast after Sinai, which is.
So you're saying it is biblical. In fact, we should ordinate that all churches should play a tambourine.
You just sounded like Emperor Palpatine. I'm not. No,
dude. Didn't I just make a comment last episode about all the Star Wars references in this podcast?
We should do one.
What?
Do we have a cricket button? The way y'all just left me on.
There is, but I actually can't remember where it is.
Oh man, it's the
I didn't
only
write
thing
that
you didn't
down.
label.
Yeah, well,
crud.
Welcome.
So last week you said we were recapping.
Yeah, so we kind of just ended the episode with this song, this beautiful poem and song written and sang by Israel after God delivered them with a mighty hand. And so we didn't get all the way through 15. We're picking back up in 15 in some relevant material as far as, related to our series.
But Pharaoh's men effectively crushed and dealt with.
That snake's done.
That snake's done for.
That snake is done. So, but what we have is, and what we're going to be talking about today is, you have these people. They've come out of Egypt, and this plumed serpent has been dealt with by God. God's judged Egypt. He's judged their gods. They've been devastated. Israel leaves Egypt with all of their wealth, but they got a journey to go on. They're leaving Egypt, but they're going somewhere else. God promised them a land in Canaan. He promised Abraham this land of Canaan. And what we're going to find out is this place is full of serpents too.
I was going to say, one of the things that we recapped on the last episode was that right before the Red Sea crossing, they're pinned with the chaos waters symbolized on one side, the plumed serpent and his forces on one side, and then Baal Zephon, which literally translated means the Lord of the North, to the north, to the promised land that they're heading to. So it's like
there's that eerie
God
feeling.
Keeps has planted himself in this place, and the forces of chaos surround God's place to try to keep God's people from getting to him. And God says, not going to work.
He destroyed, I think that's kind of relevant. It's kind of cool. He destroyed the gods of Egypt, destroyed the Pharaoh of Egypt and their armies in front of the mountain of Baal. It's almost like,
you're next.
You're next. Come get it, dude.
It's like that slap video when that dude goes through and he literally slaps everyone.
I love it.
And they just keep lining up. And it's like, dude, you're going to get jacked. Just like, I
resonate with that video. So we're going to pick up in the second half of 15. These people, they're on a journey, and they come to this place. First of all, it says they went 3 days into the wilderness. So finally, there's that 3 days that, right? We talked about last week that 3 days, there's always a test.
Yeah.
That 3-day language, it comes before a test. And so right out the gate in this second half of 15, we're being told, like, there's a test coming. And they come to Marah, and the people couldn't drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. So they're in a wilderness. They're in a desert.
They found no water, and then when they finally find some, they can't drink it.
It's bitter
because it's not good. Yeah.
Well, it says the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?"
Right.
And I'm really proud of him here because he cries to the Lord and he asked the Lord for the answer, and he did the right thing.
Yeah. What does the Lord show him?
Moses seems to do the right thing, but I think it's kind of often talked about like, oh, those pesky Israelites.
Right.
They griped and complained because they had no water for 3 days. Go 3 days without water.
It's water, bro. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Go 3 days with no water.
Yeah.
You go. That's
Go 3
the test.
days in the wilderness with no
Hot
water.
wilderness. And Moses, he passes this test. Like, he does the right thing, though, even when they're grumbling.
Yeah.
That is the test. The test is when you're walking through what seems like certain death. Where are you going to go?
I love how it says, like when he cried to the Lord, that the Lord showed him, Yahweh showed him a tree and dates, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. So you have, again, as we've talked before, this same Hebrew word for the trees that are mentioned in Genesis in the garden, and it's like a hyperlink back to that. But that's going to be the thing. A tree is going to be the thing tied with this intercessor guy that makes bitter things sweet.
It's a shot back and it's a shot forward. It's this pivotal, this picture that points both ways. And
and isn't that our expectation?
There's a sermon in there all in itself.
Yeah.
It is an expectation. It says that God showed him this tree, and so they take the tree and Moses throws it in the water, and the water becomes sweet. So you have that picture forward, and also, they're learning to trust God. That He's the provider. They've seen the Yahweh of armies, right?
Yeah.
They've seen the warrior, but now they need a different side. They need provider.
In this first set of stories is God testing Israel, right? And it says that the Lord there made a statute and a rule for them, testing them, saying, if you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God and do what's right in his eyes, give ears to his commandments and keep his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I did on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord, your healer. So how you see people say like Jehovah Rapha, like it's one of God's names. This is where that word comes from, the idea that the Lord, the God that heals you, is the one that healed the bitter waters and made them sweet for you to drink.
I think that it's so much more personable when you read it, because we're on the backside of history, and so when we look back, we see the commandments and we're like, yo, that's a lot. But here, what God is saying is like, if you'll just listen to me, if you'll just do what I say, like I'm going to take care of you. Right. I'm going to be your provider. I'm going to be your healer. And there's this little bow tie on the end of it. It says they came to Elim, where they found 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. And there they encamped by the water. So those numbers are not there on accident, right? The 12 obviously, is going to link to the 12 tribes of Israel. But going back to the first episodes, that 70 number, that's the table of nations in Genesis. So it's almost like you have this moment where the tree is looked to make bitter water sweet, and then you have Israel symbolized along with the nations. And we talked about last week where God seems to leave the door open for these Egyptians, right? That if they'll fear the word of the Lord, if they can avoid the plagues too, right? And so there seems to be that open door for inclusion. Where here, I think that you have another picture forward where God is just saying, like, if you will look to the tree, Israel and the nations, they can both be there. Right. And in fact, they should be, right? Where God had divorced the nations before, now the commandment is going to be, in the future, like, I don't just expect you to come back, or I don't just leave the door open. I'm commanding it.
Yeah.
So that wraps up 15. In 16, we have this other picture, and it's relevant for the Snake Crushers series because of the symbolism here. And in 16, they come out of this Elim place where they found these 12 springs, and the bitter water is made sweet. And they come to the 15th day of the second month. And once again, the people of Israel, they're going to complain.
Yeah.
Right? They grumble against Moses and Aaron. And the people say, we wish that we would have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, where we sat by meat pots and ate bread till we were full. But you have brought us into the wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger.
It's one thing, I feel like, to say, like, man, I wish I could die. But, like, you've seen the way that God ravaged these Egyptians. I mean, absolutely.
Man.
A lot of them didn't get to just die a quick death, right? Like first you were hit with boils and
10
frogs
strikes.
and gnats and literally God says, I'm going to punch Egypt and its gods 10 times, and my last strike will kill all of them. So it's like, you would rather die that way? That's crazy, man.
And saying something like that, we kind of see like, whoa, you kind of deserve to get yanked for that.
Well, man, yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. Because God is trying, he's been patient with them, but he's trying to teach them something.
Yeah.
Don't grumble. Ask.
Right. Yes.
When Moses comes and says, hey, we can't drink the water.
Well, and I think something interesting to note too, like the serpent was your provider for a long time.
Yeah.
But what was the cost of his provision?
Yes.
Like his enslavement, his oppression, the firstborn of your children were thrown into the Nile. Yeah. Every male child you had was thrown into the Nile.
Still looking towards Egypt.
It was slaughtering you.
You can't look towards Egypt.
Yeah.
Don't remember Egypt as a good thing, and ask. You have Moses, and this is where he once again fills this role of the snake crusher, because he trusts God. He knows God in such a way that he believes God is good enough, right? That if I ask, if I have need, I can go to him, and he's going to provide.
In this next passage, before there is a Shabbat or a Sabbath established, God says, I'm going to test them. Literally before, I'm going to test them to see if they'll walk in my law or not. So I'm going to send bread from heaven. He says, I'm literally going to rain bread from heaven for you. And the people will go out and gather a day portion every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as what they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron tell them, at the evening you will know the Lord. It was the Lord that brought you out of Egypt. I don't know how there's any question in that, but and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you complain against us? So he's going to give you meat in the evening and bread in the morning.
He's literally saying, I will give you your daily bread.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, dude, you and the I don't guess it wasn't a pun, but it was, like,
I don't know.
Funny little.
I just heard, you are my daily bread.
Man,
No.
I do think that's relevant, though, because the idea is that, like, the provision comes down from heaven. And just to briefly cover, like, this, what they call manna, it's described as like a frost-like substance. It just shows up on the ground.
Yeah.
It just, every morning it shows up.
It tastes sweet like honey.
Sweet like honey. And so this idea is, like, it's established well inside of, like, ancient Jewish writings, and other Jewish literature that's not canon. That this manna, it comes from heaven. It's what they eat up there. So God is giving them like a taste of Eden. Like, I'm not just going to give you a loaf of bread. I'm giving you the good stuff. This is the heavenly bread.
Something that's interesting to me, if you go back to Passover, what time was the lamb killed? It was at twilight, right? And he tells them in verse 12, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. I've heard their complaining. Say to them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. You shall know that I am the Lord your God. Maybe we should expect that for whatever is killed at twilight, when you eat of its flesh, that, I don't know, some kind of connection there.
So, of course, it didn't stop them from complaining. It isn't very long after eating this heavenly bread, this gift from God's table, right? Yeah. They start to grumble against that. And they despise the bread that they're given. They say, no, we want meat. And so God provides quail. But into the next chapter, in 17, we have another moment.
But they fail first, right?
Right.
Like grumbling.
Yeah. Well, no, he tells them, like, only gather on 5 days, enough for 5 days. On the sixth day, gather enough for both days, the sixth and the seventh.
Don't go out on the seventh.
And on the 17th verse of that chapter, it says, the people of Israel did so. They gathered, some more and some less. So, dude, come on.
I think that does bring up a good point, because that's another test of them to say, like, are you going to trust that I'm going to do what I said I would do?
Yeah.
That what you gather on the sixth day will be enough. And that on that restart, after you rest, if you can just trust God and rest, that next day, it's going to be there again. You don't have to worry. The idea is, I'm not going to give you enough to where you don't need me. You just need to trust that I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to provide for you. I love one thing that it sticks out to me whenever I read through these passages is just how patient Yahweh is with Israel.
Yeah.
It's like an understanding of he knows what he's dealing with, right? When he leads them out of in the Exodus, he says, "I'm not going to take you this other way because you're going to see war, and that's gonna gonna scare you, right?" It's like
dishearten you.
It's like he knows who he's dealing with. But in 17, we have this moment where the congregation, they moved on from the wilderness of sin, right? And they come to this place, Rephidim, and there's no water for the people to drink. That Rephidim, that's got some undertones. And the people that, once again, right, they quarrel with Moses over water. And Moses says, "Why do you quarrel against me? Why do you test the Lord?" Right? So we've talked a lot in this episode so far about how God is testing the people. Well, now Moses, his accusation is, you're testing God.
Yeah, you're putting the Lord to the test.
You shouldn't be doing that. He puts you to the test. You don't put him to the test. And they once again, they say, "Why'd you bring us out of Egypt? To kill us and our children here. You should have left us there." And Moses cries out to the Lord and he says, "What will I do with this people? They are ready to stone me." And the Lord said, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel. Take in your hand the staff which you have, that you struck the Nile with, and behold, I will stand before you on the rock at Horeb. And you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people will drink." I don't know if you get that just from reading it, but the idea is that God, this angel of Yahweh, this physical appearance of God, walks before Moses and stands on the rock, and then Moses strikes the rock. So it's almost like Moses is striking Yahweh. Like Yahweh has commanded Moses to strike him, and from that striking comes life.
And Moses is from what tribe again?
Levi. Ooh, that's got some New Testament undertones. That's actually really good. I don't think that I've ever thought about that.
I think there's something important to note, too. It's the same staff that he struck the Nile with.
Yeah.
And what happened to the Nile?
Pardon?
The blood. Nile was turned to blood at the striking with his staff, right? And this Nile to the Egyptians is like viewed to be the lifeblood of one of the main gods, who is the god of the underworld, Osiris, right? And so it's the same staff that was used to sort of symbolize to the Egyptians a death blow to death, to the god of death in the underworld. It's the same one, the same staff that he says, "Strike this rock that I stand on, and life-giving water will flow out from it." Kind of a beautiful picture and contrast there.
And for those of us that live on the backside of things, as we're tracing this messianic mosaic, we can look back and can make that connection and say, like, yeah, you had to strike God for life.
What's interesting too is Rephidim means rest. So they come to this place that literally means rest, and they've got none. They keep testing God, and this place is called Massah and Meribah in verse 7, that literally means testing and quarreling, right? Because you test the Lord by grumbling against him and the people that he sent to deliver you.
Yeah, and in the next little part of this story, at this place called Rest, at Rephidim, they come against this enemy, and his name is Amalek. If you look into the meaning of his name, the idea is that he's this everlasting enemy. He's forever the enemy. And so you have this new serpent to strike.
And he comes against them specifically at the place that literally translated means rest. So that everlasting enemy came and fought with Israel at rest.
Yeah.
So Moses said to Joshua, "Choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, sorry. While Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and when he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it underneath him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side, one on the other. So his hands were steady till the going down of the sun, and Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. Something I think here that's interesting to note. So Moses is weary. They place a rock underneath him for the rest on, and then his hands are held up by two people. And we know that Moses at this point in our Snake Crusher series is the focus of a mosaic, a portrait that's being painted of what we would expect from Messiah, who has played the role of deliverer and intercessor, right? But his hands are held up by two people, Aaron and Hur. And Aaron is from the tribe of Levi, and Hur is from the tribe of Judah. So the two tribes that hold up his hands to make sure that victory is won for God's people, on behalf of God's people, is the king tribe, the one we know that Messiah will come from, and the priest side. Yeah, so you have, again, as we've discussed before, this blending of
two roles.
Victory comes from the one who will be your priest,
Right.
your prophet, and your king.
And there, and in that way, like dude, that's good. That's really good, because you have those two underneath Moses is what makes Moses, victorious. Yeah, and I like too how shortly after that it says that God tells them that I will blot out the memory of Amalek from underneath heaven.
Man.
So but if you look at this, it almost seems like, okay, I'm going to blot his name out. And you get this expectation at first that that's going to be an instantaneous thing.
Yeah.
Like he's just going to blot him out and he's going to be done. But then you read after that, it says, and the Lord says, I will make war with Amalek from every generation.
Yeah.
So it's like this idea that this war and like you said, you have those two roles, king, priest combined underneath Moses. So this king priest is going to make war with Amalek from generation to generation.
A hand upon the throne of the Lord.
Forever, right? But the problem is Moses isn't going to live forever.
Yeah.
Moses is a man. And so here you have this picture and this expectation of there needs to be a king priest.
Yeah.
And he needs to make war with this spiritual enemy, this everlasting enemy, from generation to generation.
Well, that's the macro. That's the really big, the big picture. And the micro is, who is he reciting it? In the ear of Joshua, right?
Yeah.
Who is going to be highlighted as his successor. And he's also the one he's taking on Amalek and his forces in battle, right? So God tells him, hey, tell your successor, we're only getting started.
Yeah.
I'm going to beat this snake until I blot its memory out from under heaven.
And the more that we talk about that, the more that it begs the question, right? That if people they're mortal, right? God said that he appointed it one for a man once to die, and then, that's just the wages of sin. So where it says that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation, that the idea is, there needs to be a person who's going to last generation to generation. There needs to be a king priest who isn't going to be this one generation in. And so, as you said, it highlights Joshua, it kind of brings him to the surface, but you're already seeing the insufficiency.
There is one more thing about Amalek I want to point out. Creek, earlier on in our Snake Crusher series, highlighted, it was with Lot and his two children. The children and the offspring of disobedience or iniquity often end up becoming the rivals to God's promised seed, right? And Lot, who Abraham loved as a son, it was the son of his deceased brother, had two offspring, Moab and Ammon, right? Well, Jacob's brother is Esau, and by virtue of Deuteronomy 2, scriptures in Genesis and Numbers also that highlight this, Amalek is one thing for sure, potentially two. So Amalek, at the very least, is a descendant of Esau and the Edomites. So some of the very first people that contend with God's people at the place of rest are descendants of the sons of disobedience, right? Or descendants of Esau, right? And then also, Amalek potentially could be a giant. He's a descendant of the Horites, which by virtue of Deuteronomy chapter 2 are listed amongst the giant clans.
Yeah.
Right.
So whoever this guy is, not only is he bad, but I think it's funny, back to what you noted before, that if things were just done as God has said to do them,
You wouldn't have these problems.
Oftentimes we wouldn't have these problems.
It really doesn't matter how you view, like, the giant clans. It doesn't matter if you think that they're 15 feet tall or if you think that they're 7 feet tall. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that they're wicked. They're evil. These are seed of this serpent line.
And they're still
corrupted.
Huge. Yeah.
Yeah, they're corrupted. Like you see where Esau, whereas Jacob, he marries from his own people. Esau just goes right out and starts, you know.
Yeah. Taking Canaanites and doing all kinds
and so
of stuff.
he does what shouldn't be done. So you have the idea of, like, this guy has no respect for, you know, God's chosen lineage, and so the result of that, it becomes these giants or these people that they have a corrupted line.
Man, I think a final note that's interesting to note is in the very next chapter, there's this kind of weird passage after this victory where you have Moses being held up by the king line and the priest line, and Amalek's defeated. God promises he's going to beat him from generation to generation. And there's like this focus thus far on Moses and how he is a Mosaic portrait. Yeah. But we yeah, that's funny, right? But in the very next chapter, there's a story that we won't read through, but to summarize, it highlights the insufficiency of Moses. And his father-in-law gives him some advice. He says, you can't do this for all these people in a way that you're not the snake crusher. You need help.
Right. You're incapable of judging all the people.
Yeah, and so here's what you need to do. But it's interesting to note that the final thing that's the only thing in that chapter that's mentioned is you're not really the guy.
This is Creek with At the Table podcast. We pray you're enjoying the show. If you are, feel free to leave us a good rating, share our podcast with a friend, and follow us on your podcasting platform. If you'd like to support the show, follow our Patreon or check out our social media for updates on merchandise. So grab a seat, kick back, and let's get back into what's at the table.
Yo.
Before we move on to this next half, I'd like to point out something that I was actually thinking earlier. But, you know, when Joshua and Hur are holding up Moses, you do see Moses with outstretched arms in a vertical position. Is what sometimes they depict him holding a staff or something, but it doesn't really seem that way. It actually just says hand.
I'm good if he is holding a staff.
Right.
Then you just got a tree involved, so it's like,
ooh, yeah.
It's even more symbolic.
You know, there is a lot of symbolism there with his arms outstretched, and that is when victory comes.
What does it look like?
I don't know. That hasn't happened yet. No, just kidding.
Well,
it does look like somebody on a cross.
Where's the geography? Like, is he just on a flat plain or
on a rock?
He's on a hill.
That goes back to like our Edenic imagery. It's like God on a mountain and a tree. When those things come together, you got paradise, right? That's the good thing.
And I will point out too, you know, later at the end of the chapter it says, you know, Moses built an altar and called it Yahweh Nisi, the Lord is my banner.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, Moses is almost stretched out like a banner of victory.
Yeah.
Is what it seems like there.
And it's funny, too. We mentioned how, like, God didn't take them by the way of the Philistines because they would see war and faint. God brings them out of the wilderness of sin in stages to a place literally called rest. And at the place where God intends for them to have rest, a personification of the serpent comes to assault them.
Yeah. You know, I just thought about something. It's not super relevant, but it seems like that we kind of look at the way that the Israelites viewed, like, the Messiah as, like, you know, well, they were expecting, like, this conqueror, this political... It's really easy to from their perspective to see that, right?
Yes.
Because, like, the predominant way that God reveals himself in the Old Testament is the warrior. Like, he is bodying everybody all the time. And if Israel disobeys, they're getting bodied too, you know what I mean?
And that does, you know, there isn't a high expectation, and sometimes you can see why.
Yeah.
I like how the next chapter points this out, too. You have on the third new moon after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt. So there's another, it's not a third day per se, but it is a third new moon, that they came to the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness. And Israel encamped before the mountain while Moses went up to God. So, geographically speaking, you have their current point before this chapter at Rephidim. You have Sinai in front of them, the place where God desires to meet them. and the enemy stands in between. And God's already pointed out, even though we pointed out in Exodus, they're dressed for war. They came out armored up, ready to fight. And God said, you're not ready to fight. You can't fight. If you go to the Philistines, you're going to get scared and you're going to turn around. So the serpent comes in between them and the destination point, which is a meeting place with God. And God wins victory for them, right? God says, this is what we're going to do. You know, the king line, the priest line is going to hold up this intercessor guy's arms, you know, on top of this hill, and that's going to be what destroys the serpent that tries to keep you from getting to me. And in this next chapter, they come to Sinai, and Moses goes up to God, and God calls to him out of the mountain, saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, tell the people of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you out myself on eagle's wings. Now therefore, if you indeed will obey my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession among all of the peoples. For the whole earth is mine, and you shall be to me as a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. There's a concept there that will come across way later in the New Testament. A kingdom of priests.
Yeah. Well, that was always the idea of this Israel, right? That's the promise to Abraham that all of the nations, they're supposed to be blessed through you, right? If they'll bless you, I'm going to bless them. And then indeed the idea of the seed is like eventually there's going to come one that's going to bless all the nations.
I like how in the following verses, like in 9, it says, when Moses told the words of the people to the Lord said to Moses, go to the people, consecrate them today and tomorrow. Let them wash their garments and be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all of the people. So we have the third day again, which signals what's coming up.
Test is coming.
There's a test. And God is coming to them at Sinai. It's powerful.
Yeah. In fact, he says, I'm going to come down on that third day. I'm going to come down on the mountain as this thick smoke. You're going to physically see me. But the idea is this is all the language here points to a marriage. Right? You're going to consecrate yourself. You're going to come meet me, and you're going to be my bride. I'm going to enter the covenant. I'm going to marry you. And so this idea that they're supposed to be in a loving relationship with this God, right? God doesn't just want to be the tyrannical dictator. He wants to be in relation to these people. And the test that comes is he tells them, first off, you need to mark up a limit around the mountain. If anything crosses that, don't touch it.
Dead.
Yeah, and he says that if you cross that, I'm going to break out against you. That's terrifying, right? So there's this idea of like, and we've come across this a little bit before when Moses, right, when he's at the burning bush, and God says, take off your shoes because the place that you're standing now,
it's holy.
It's holy. Why is it holy? Because I'm there.
Yeah.
This idea that this space is sacred, and so this mountain, God says, I'm going to descend on this entire mountain. This is going to be my boat. I'm going to descend on it, and this is now sacred space. And if you cross that without my permission and in the way that I've said to do so, I'm going to kill you. And so the idea is, and he then says, he's like, so on this third day when I come down, I want you to tell the people to come to the mountain. After they've consecrated themselves, after they've done all this on this third day, tell the people to come to the mountain. And Moses goes, he relays the message. And in chapter 20, we read it where Moses goes back to God and he's like, okay, but you said that there's limits, right? We're not supposed to go on the mountain. God's like, yeah, that's right. So you're in this kind of a dichotomy where God has first said, come to the mountain, but then there's this expectation, well, if we do, we're going to get whacked.
Right.
There's a desire for a closeness to their God, right? And a fear too. But what you have is, because God descends to the top of the mountain, according to this scripture. And where does Moses go? Moses goes to the top of the mountain too.
Yeah.
So this intercessor guy, He not
descend
not
down
only
to
is,
God.
is condescended to the level of the people and is among the people, but ascends to the height of the mountain where God is at. He goes to meet with God. I'm not saying that he is, at least Moses. Moses is not God, but he goes to meet with God.
Right, and it seems that this intercessor is special, like obviously, but why? God seems to pick an intercessor.
When he told the Egyptians, he said, "I'm going to make you," or he told Moses, "I'm going to make you a god to the Egyptians."
Right.
So there's this idea that Moses is elevated to this place of authority, as she's the physical representation of God before the people.
Yeah.
I'll also point out and pay attention to this narrative as we go. God does expect more from this intercessor.
Yeah.
So this intercessor grumbles. That's all bad.
Yeah.
Right.
He needs to walk. The commandment, right? You pointed out earlier. The commandment is listen to my instructions, do what I tell you to do. And so, like, the expectation of this intercessor is, you better do that perfectly.
If the intercessor is mad at the people will assume that God is mad at them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, too, that this nearness but not nearness happens right after we have the imagery of an intercessor with his arms outstretched upon a hill, defeating the serpent.
Right.
So, like maybe an interweaving of ideas, that it is only after that happens that nearness to God can be had in the way that people desire due to the intercessor or the snake crusher that's being forecasted.
Well, I think the idea of this test is, so if God told you to come up the mountain, but he also told you, only in this certain way, the people in chapter 20, they say to Moses, like, well, you go up. We don't let Yahweh speak to us lest we die. So this idea is like they're not just not going to go up the mountain, but they said don't let Yahweh speak to us. And so there's two ways of looking at this. You can either look at this and say like, oh well, they should have wanted Yahweh to speak to them, right? They should have went up the mountain. They didn't do it. They failed the test. Or you could look at this a different way. You could look at this as Israel's finally learning a lesson. This God, he is above them. And there is sacred space. And there's an acknowledgement in them that says, we're not qualified for that.
That's what I was going to say. There's what feels like an intended dissatisfaction with the story. Although it doesn't seem that they've just come out and disobeyed or done anything wrong, you see a people that need to be near to their God, but can't come near their God.
They recognize they can't.
There's a chasm.
Because now they fear God. And that's a good thing, right? They don't need to be afraid that God is malignant or is mean or is going to hurt them. But there is a level of like, yeah, you need to fear God. Because if you don't, he's going to break out against you.
A little off topic, but if only like the modern church had this fear.
Man, we could definitely use a baptism of the fear of the Lord in our day and age.
Instead of
that
just
sounds terrifying.
Like, yeah.
I don't know what that means.
But I think it's interesting to know. Like in the next chapter in Exodus 20, scholars will call this the Decalogue. We know it as the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
The Hebrews would say the 10 words. For these 10 words, God spoke to the people. So
10 strikes, 10 words.
Yeah.
Actually, if you break down the creation narrative in Hebrew, it's 10 words too.
Yeah. So
it's not listed in Hebrew as 7 days. It's 10 words of creation. So you have 10 words of creation, 10 words of decreation, and then 10 words of
kind of a recreation in a way.
Instruction.
I was going to say
order again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But something that's important to note is after this Decalogue, and I won't belabor reading all of it. In verse 18 it says, "Now after this law is given, when the people saw the thunder and flashes of lightning, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid, and they trembled, and they stood far off." So they weren't near the mountain. And they said to Moses, "You speak to us." They tell the intercessor, "You speak to us, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us, or we will die." And Moses says to the people, the intercessor does, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, and that you may not sin." The people stood far off while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was.
It does leave that taste. Yeah, I see what you mean by that almost dissatisfaction. It's like, but you should have come near. You could have come near. The invitation was for you to come near.
And the very last portion of this chapter seems like, why is this here? There's like this note about altars, a law specifically given about them. It said, don't make gods of silver to be with me or gods of gold or anything like that. On an altar of earth you will make for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings. And every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and I will bless you. If you make me an altar of stone, you will not build it of hewn stones. For if you wield your tool upon it, you will profane it. There's like this idea that that this altar, that the place where God meets man cannot come about by the work of man's own hand, if that makes sense. Like, not only can you not draw near this mountain in the way that my presence is here and I'm holy, but there's like a reestablishment of that idea in there's nothing that you can craft. There's no point of artistry, skill, talent you have that will be able to help you cross that divide.
Right.
And that, at least that's what it seems to me. Like, if you touch any of this stuff, you profane it. I made it. The earth is mine. The whole earth is mine. The stone's mine. The wood's mine.
This
it's
is
all
also,
mine.
if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't this established as Pentecost? This is Pentecost. It's celebrated as the giving of the law, right?
Yeah.
They go up. They get
It's
the law.
the trip after Passover.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's the third day that Moses goes up, and he's up there
Right.
for 40 days. So, like, the connection with Pentecost, and we're I don't know if we're going to get there, if we're going to belabor the details of that story, but the idea of this smoke and the fire, right? There's fire, the tongues of fire, right? You see those connections. Those are going to become really important. All of this language becomes really important in understanding the New Testament when we read about this holiday.
Day of Pentecost, yeah.
Yeah.
Day of Pentecost.
And in this next episode, skipping a lot of chapters, just giving a really brief overview, Moses goes up on the mountain for 40 days, and God gives him instructions for a number of things. Altars of incense, various commandments. There's even like an intermediary piece of laws about slaves and stuff like that. But we come to in Exodus chapter 32,
Before we hit
just a heartbreaking episode.
Before we hit that, there is one thing I wanted to point out. I think it's in 29. In the instructions to craft the robes for the priest, he's supposed to wear this sash with a golden crown, a plate on his head that says "sanctified" or "holy to God."
Mm.
And when we look at this messianic mosaic, right, this crown is a crown on his head, a golden crown on his head. So it's not what in Greek would be called a Stephanos. This is a kingly crown worn on his head of the priest that says "holy to God."
So a priest is a king again, in a way.
It seems like that we should expect one to be.
Mm.
Right.
So now getting into 32, we're here. Everybody's familiar with this passage. Moses has went up the mountain on the third day. He's up there for 40 days. God,
Which is more language, New Testament
right.
language.
That
40
becomes
days,
important.
40
40
nights.
days.
There is one more thing in 29. I'm sorry. I know this is derailing, but I think this is important for the future. So there's like the fat of the rams and stuff that are offered in 29. But in verse 23 it says, "And one loaf of bread and one cake of bread made with oil, one wafer out of the basket with unleavened bread, that is before the Lord. You shall put all these on the palms of Aaron and on the palms of his son, and wave them for an offering before the Lord. Then you shall take them from their hands and burn them on the altar and the top of the burnt offering as a pleasing aroma before the Lord." It is a food offering. There's like a weaving idea again of bread. Like, so you have the manna, like God blending himself with the idea that I provide bread for you. And in this case, like, the bread is burnt and the aroma goes up before God.
One might say sacrificed.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, you were saying golden calf.
So in 32, Exodus chapter 32, we have this moment where God he's delayed up on the mountain. He hasn't come down. It's been 40 days. He's up there. He's in the thick smoke, in the presence of Yahweh. Right. That's the idea of like. In the literary narrative, it's like Moses is back in Eden. He's on the mountain of God, and he's up there in the thick smoke, in the presence of God. He's up there for 40 days. He didn't pack a lunch. We don't read where he went up there with a caravan of food. He's up there for 40 days, and he's sustained
Man.
by the presence of God. And so God is giving him this law that he already spoke to the people. Yahweh spoke it to the people. He's giving it to him. He's with his own hand. He's
written
etching
in
it.
stone.
He's etching it in stone, not hewn by human hands.
Right.
The first set of tablets, God cuts out from the mountain, and God etches on them. And so he gives these to Moses. But down on planet Earth, not in Eden, things aren't going very good.
Man. In verse 1, it says, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down, they gathered themselves together to Aaron and say to him, up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him.
I will say in Egypt, there are a lot of these cultures at the time had gods that looked like bulls or calves.
Yeah. A lot of the surrounding nations would.
Bulls of Bashan, for
exactly.
example.
Yeah.
Actually, there are places in the Old Testament where Yahweh he's called a bull.
Yeah.
Right.
Not a golden bull, but it's called a bull.
But in ancient Near Eastern culture, the bull often personifies the head deity of whatever.
I'm pointing out they're still being influenced by this pagan
Right.
culture that they kind of
I think it's funny, too, that, I know we keep, the whole episode's purpose is about a forecast, but I'm trying not to hit the New Testament too much. But it's funny, I think, how even today, our intercessor goes up, and then, what are we told in Scripture that a scoffer does? It's well,
he's never coming back.
Where's the
He's
promise
delayed
of
his
his
return.
coming? So instead, we'll beat our fellow servants. We will live, as you just pointed out, as all the other nations do. As of this Jesus who's gone up to be with God in Eden, that's being prepared for us and brought back down, we don't know. But we'll serve these other gods. We'll do these other things.
Man. Yeah, well, and the idea that, we don't know what's become of him. Yeah, you do. Yahweh's on the mountain. You can see the smoke, dude.
How do you not know?
There's lightning. This isn't a one-off storm. This is 40 days of smoke, lightning, and fire descending on this mountain. You watch Moses walk into it.
Well, it makes you wonder. They're like, well, it's been 40 days since he walked into all that. He might be dead.
Maybe God was serious when he said not.
No doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. No. But the idea that they don't know what's become of him. I guess I could kind of see it, but the idea is you still see Yahweh on that mountain.
But they give him credit, right? They say, as for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. So Aaron's like, I tell you what, all that gold that God gave you from the Egyptians, take that off, bring it to me, and I'll make you something. So in verse 4, he fashions for them with a graving tool a golden calf and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. This is kind of I don't know if you want to say an oxymoron. It just said Moses led them out of the land of Egypt, so why not make a golden Moses? Right? But they're like, we don't know what happened with him. And I mean, you can clearly see that the mountain is still engulfed with the presence of Yahweh, right? And they're like, oh, well, these are the gods that brought us. Gods?
Why put an S on there?
Why is there an S here? Yeah.
This is also Aaron, who really probably should know, that's not a good
definitely
idea.
should know.
And he's actually one who's a Levite as well.
He's just been picked, and him and his people and his descendants will be the high priest of Israel forever. It's and then the first thing you do is
that's peer pressure, really.
Which I think is intended to showcase his illegitimacy as a permanent thing, right? There cannot be a tribe of men that will be able to hold the office of a priesthood and do it as it is supposed to be done. At least not purely and only a man.
And literally, the first commandment that God shouted off the mountain at the people is, do not make any engraven image. Don't make an image.
Dude, I just got to say, I see Night at the Museum here. You know where Ben Stiller comes up to those cavemen and he's like, you stay here. And I'm like, oh. And then as soon as he turns around to leave, they follow him. He's like, no. You stay here. I know that's maybe even a little not good to say, but are we not the cavemen? God's like, hey, don't do that. And they're like, yeah, all the things that God says, we're going to do it.
It's only been 40 days, and God's like, first thing, the first deal breaker, don't make a graven image. 40 days later, graven image. And they sacrifice it, and it says they worship the graven image.
It's the top of the top 10.
Man, it's number one. Yeah, you didn't just like covet your neighbor's wife. You know, you went straight for the number one.
What's more offensive even is Aaron makes a proclamation and says, tomorrow will be a feast to Yahweh. It's like, what? Huh? What do you mean, a feast to Yahweh? This is crazy, man. Where is the accountability?
Well, it's
here?
almost like a merging, like they're trying to merge their culture with God, which is also what the people do now.
Well, you be on that.
But,
He's on that train today.
It's like they're like, we're gonna. This is Yahweh,
dude.
This is just a calf that looks like, I don't know. You get what I'm saying?
This is a golden. I know that you literally just said not to wield a tool on anything because you would profane it.
But I really think that my God looks like a bull.
And I think he's golden too.
they're
so I'm literally going to wield my tool, my engraving tool on a.
I'm going to fashion God in my own image.
Man.
Dang.
So gosh, dog.
Stepped on some toes there.
Yeah. After this, we have this moment where God, obviously, you know, he's omniscient. He sees everything. He knows what's going on. Right? He looks down off the mountain. And it says, the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people. Behold, they are stiff-necked. Now therefore, leave me alone, so that my wrath can burn against them, and I will consume them, in order that I may make a great nation from you.
Man.
That's also technically keeping the promise, though. Like,
well, yeah. Well, the
right?
idea is like, you think that I need you?
Right.
I'll start over with the Levite, and somehow Judah will still have a set. You know,
who's been obedient thus far.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right. But the idea that, like, we've just talked about how patient God has been with Israel, but breaking number one, that was a deal breaker. He says, "Leave me alone. I'm angry with him, and I'm just gonna consume him. Burn him up."
But their intercessor offers to take their punishment.
That's the next point.
Man.
It says, but Moses implored the Lord his God and said, "O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against the people? You have brought them from the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand. Why should the Egyptians get to say, he brought them out with evil intent? He wanted to kill them on the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth. Turn from your burning anger. Relent from this disaster that you have said against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, I will multiply your offering as stars of the heaven, and I will give them this land, for them and their offspring, and they shall inherit it forever." And the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on the people.
Man, so God, it doesn't get more forecasting and intercession on that.
Oh, man. Well, that's what I love that. You know, most of the time in the Old Testament, it says Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's almost a little flavor on this where he's kind of like buttering it up a little more. It's like Israel,
yeah,
you know, the new guy, not the heel grabber.
And for our purposes, what does Israel mean? Wrestles with God.
Man.
Yeah. I mean, what I like about this particular passage is Moses highlights to us the snake crusher, the need for an intercessor that is rich in mercy. And you know, just because of what follows, that could have only came from the Spirit of Yahweh, because what Moses shows us next is a different kind of animal. So it says he's going down the mountain. I love this. So Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides, the front and the back they were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. So this is the book of the covenant, right, that God has written with his own hands.
I think did you read that, though? It says that it's the words of the testimony. It doesn't say it's the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
I think this is the idea, like, this is the marriage contract.
Yeah.
This is like God's married Israel. This is the contract.
Yeah.
And he's coming down, he's coming down with it.
And we remember that Joshua's halfway up. So he's not down with the people, but he's not all the way up with Moses. And it says Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, and he said to Moses, "There is a noise of war in the camp." And Moses said, "It is not for the shouting of victory that this sound is, or the sound of a cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear." So as soon as he came near the camp, and he sees the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. So first Yahweh's anger burns hot. And Moses is like, no, don't kill him, right? Don't do that. Don't do that. And Moses goes down.
Thought.
Yeah, he comes down and he's like, matter of fact, breaks the tablets at the foot of the mountain.
So right there, like we would say, like you did mess up right there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You just broke God's law, literally.
The one that was supposed to be the intercessor took this marriage covenant between the people and God, and he broke it.
It'd be like, yeah, it's like you talk God out of destroying them. And then you go down and you see what God had already seen, and he said, oh, I'm just going to rip this up.
He crashed their party.
They're not going to marry God now.
Dude, and he gets them in a savage way. So not only does it break the tablets at the foot of the mountain, but he takes the calf they made, he burned it with fire, ground it into powder, scattered it on the water. It made the people of Israel drink it. And he said to Aaron, which has got to be disgusting.
You drink your iniquity.
Almost like Mara, right? Bitter waters. It has to be. So what did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them? And he said, don't let the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, they're set on evil, for they said, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, we don't know. So I said to them, if you got gold, take it off. So he recounts the story. He tells them what happens. And Moses sees that the people had broke loose. For after Aaron had let them break loose to the derision of their enemies, Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side, come to me. And all of the sons of Levi, the priests, gather around him. And he says to them, thus says the Lord your God, put your sword on your side, go to and from the camp, from gate to gate, and each of you kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor. So the sons of Levi did, and that day 3,000 men fell.
That's a cold piece.
It is.
I think that it's funny too, like the excuse of Aaron, and I know everybody points it out, but it's like he says, "I threw the earrings and the gold in the fire, and
the calf came out."
Yahweh made the calf, maybe, right? Or it's like the calf made itself, but it's like, what about that part where you took your tool and
made that.
It did all the work on that thing, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of, I don't want to say hopeless, but now pretty much all of our intercessors, or I guess candidates, are out now.
Yeah.
Well, I love the zeal of Moses, right? Because he's like, hey, we're going to choose today. Who's on the Lord's side? Come over here and go kill everybody. But God did not command Moses to do that.
Man.
God had already forgiven the iniquity of the people on Sinai. That's the whole reason that he said he was talked out of destroying them. Moses did exactly what what God was going to do.
Yeah.
And so this is the failure of Moses.
Yeah, I think that the way that this chapter concludes just kind of gives us a sad note. The next day Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin. I'm going to go up to the Lord, and perhaps I can make an atonement for you. So Moses goes to the Lord and says, alas, this people has sinned a great sin. They made gods of gold for themselves. But if you will now forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of the book in which you have written. Wow. But the Lord said to Moses, no. Whoever sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. But now go lead the people to the place about which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day of their visit, I will visit their sin upon them. And the chapter concludes with the Lord sending a plague on the people because they made the calf.
That's a good point. It's like Moses has the right idea, right? I'm going up the mountain. I'm going to make an atonement. And it even says, like, listen, forgive them. Blot me out of your book.
Right.
But God's like, no, it's not good enough. Your sacrifice isn't good enough.
Right.
So he's got the right idea.
How can you atone for their sin?
You're a sinner too. You broke the law. You just threw it on the ground.
And he had just told them chapters before. It's like, hey, if you do my commandments, if you keep my words, the 10 words literally that I just spoke to you, right? Well, the 10 words came after that. But he said, I won't send any of the plagues or diseases or disasters that I sent upon the Egyptians to you. I'll keep you from it. They break it.
Right.
Not only the top 10, but the top of the top 10. Right. And God's like, well, here's your plague, I mean.
And it's, it's kind of time to land the plane, but just a couple of notes, First off, if you now cannot see that the Old and New Testaments are connected and unified in the same story, I mean, you're trying.
Yeah.
And, now we have this it sets us up to see that, everybody that was a candidate is really no longer.
Yeah, we're left with one person, Joshua. He wasn't in the camp.
Right.
He stayed on the mountain, and he trusted that Moses was going to come back off the mountain. And so he's elevated and left, and we're kind of left there. But one of the things that I think is important, and I don't want to belabor it, but for the purposes of this episode, we're left on this place where God says, whoever sins against me, I'm going to blot them out. And that's like terrifying.
Yeah.
Because who isn't going to sin against God? Everyone in the camp just did. Moses has. So is everybody getting blotted out? I mean, Moses had the right idea. If you'll blot me out, you forgive them.
There's infidelity at the marriage ceremony.
Yeah.
And,
it's like you didn't even make it past the bridal, and you already...
There was no honeymoon. There was...
No. But, so you're left in this place where, like, everybody's going to have to answer for their sin.
And so if then we had before landing the plane, we're at Sinai, the place where God not only gives his law and his instruction, but tries to ratify this marriage covenant betwixt him and his people that way back from Genesis 11, out of the Tower of Babel, he picks out for himself. He guides them through over 400 years of slavery. He leads them out of it. He brings them to his mountain. He attempts to marry them. Now, while he is joining himself to the people divorce him for another god and call it by his name. Several gods that they fashioned out of gold. And there's this heart-wrenching picture, like, is this not one of the problems that the snake crusher needed to solve? Yeah. It goes back to what we talked about with Jacob and the Bible Project. Shout out to you guys, highlighted this really well with Tim Mackey. It's like the physics question. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, right? Because the sin of man doesn't seem to be budging. God's people are not.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't. But God has still made a promise that he's going to relate to this people, right?
And we have the forecasters, right? We have the forecasters of a snake crusher and an intercessor. And 2 snakes have been crushed. Pharaoh's done with. Amalek not only was knocked in battle, but God said from generation to generation, I am going to work until I blot your name out from under heaven.
Yeah.
So there's war against the serpent being had, but we desperately need a snake crusher.
Well, the seed of the woman looks too much like the snake, and it's obviously even Moses, the best among them, he's not good enough, but God's not going to compromise his standard.
Right.
So it's like it's the force in the object. How do we rectify this? What's going to win?
You guys are going to need an intercessor who passes the test.
Man. Amen. Well, I think that's pretty well what's at the table for today.
Yeah. Well, we can tie it off there, and I actually, that's a good place to land. So for the purpose of this episode, I think that Godspeed.
Yeah.
Catch you guys later.
Catch you on the flip side.
I knew you were going to say that.
Thank you for listening to another episode of At the Table Podcast. We hope you have been blessed by the content of the show. If you enjoyed, subscribe and give us a like on Facebook. If you want to support the podcast, go to our Patreon, At the Table Podcast. Until next time, thank you, and God bless.